You roll over and play dead, or you get up and you fight.
It wasn't even that they were like giving you away. They tried to sell you for cold hard cash.
Failure is about learning. Failure doesn't define you.
There is always a way forwards. I just need to find out what that way is. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 12 Steps to Success podcast. So this episode nearly broke me in the edit. Not because it wasn't good, quite the opposite in fact. It's just that the person I'm speaking to today has lived about 7 different lives, and I don't think we've ever had a conversation that's lasted less than 2 hours. So trying to cut that down into something coherent felt mildly impossible. And that's without getting into the full list of things that didn't even get mentioned in the interview. Publishing a magazine, radio hosting, being a guest of members of the royal family at Buckingham Palace, and then throwing up in the Queen's toilet while she was there, which honestly, this all feels like a fairly accurate summary of her energy. But beyond the stories, and there are a lot of stories, what I really wanted to capture in this conversation was the mindset underneath all of it. Her name is Moira, and contrary to what most podcast interviewers do, she's my mum. So, let's go. This one is going to be a slightly weird episode, but I will not give them too much of an intro other than to say that this person has been in my life for a very, very long time. Their name is Moira. Other people will know them as my mum. And strangely, when I was getting some feedback from people who work with her yesterday, one of the bits of feedback that made me laugh out loud was she has a smile that can peel a banana. And I don't really know what that means. But without further ado, I would love to welcome to the show my mum, Moira Carmenate.
Hi, I've never heard that before.
So I'm going to start, as I always do, with my typical Cilla-Black question of what's your name and where'd you come from?
And I'll try not to respond with a Scouse accent. And I'm Moira Carmenate, and I'm from Greenock in Scotland.
And where are you now? Because I know you're not in Scotland anymore.
I am certainly not. It's a wee bit warmer. I am in the Alicante province of Spain.
Very nice. So while I jumped to where you are now, I am actually going to go right the way back to childhood, first and foremost. And so I'd love to hear more about your childhood and kind of how that impacted you in your early stages of development to become who you are today.
It could answer a lot of things, I think. Well, I was born, my father was in the gospel choir and my mother was much older than him, and she got pregnant. They had a baby. I'm the result. And then she tried to sell me, basically, but there were no takers. So they clearly had an advanced view of how I might turn out, and it was too hot to handle. So as a baby born in Scotland, I was taken to a place called Gravesend in Kent, where I was to be sold, but there were no takers. And my father's mother came to the rescue, basically. So my grandmother and my grandfather, and collected me from Gravesend and took me to Greenock in Scotland, which is where I grew up.
So I feel like this is a very heavy start to the episode already, and we're just jumping straight in. So it wasn't even that they were like giving you away. They tried to sell you for cold hard cash.
Yep.
How does that shape someone's self-worth at like such a young age when you find that out?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know until I was much older that was the case. I did know that I had no mother and I had a father who was in the background somewhere because they separated and they went their different ways. So at a very young age of, I think I was 6 or 7 or something, I still have a very clear recollection of this lady coming knocking on the door of my grandmother's house in a tenement building in Scotland. And my grandmother was out, my grandfather was in, and this woman kind of knocks on the door. And the bit that I recollect, I don't remember the complete handover, if you like, but was taking the hand of this woman and diving down the stairs 2 at a time with this woman who proceeds to say, "I'm your mother." And kind of a 6-year-old going, "Hello." I also recall afterwards her going away and me going back home. And when my grandmother came in, that my grandfather got a complete, excuse my French, bollocking for letting this Satan woman come anywhere near their granddaughter. So that was my only time that I ever saw that woman who was my mother. What transpired over the years was that my grandmother, they were very Christian, brought up, she was originally born in Ireland and very stern and very, very Bible bashing in many respects, although my grandfather wasn't. But this woman was like a harlot, She had, seduced her son, my father, taken him away from the Baptist church and choir, and, turned him into this evil person who became a rock and roll singer, So, coming back to the early recollection, I grew up where, like, my mother was the worst thing that could have ever walked the planet. And my father also kind of disappeared off the face of the earth for a while. Some people get really hung up about what's happened in their life and they hang on to it for grim death. Even at a young age, I kind of thought, you know what? She had her life. Whatever it was that happened, happened. And why would I go and track her down for nosiness? Because all I would be nosy. What does she look like now? Who is she? But would I turn up and disturb somebody's life? No, even at a young age, I thought, she made her decision. That was her decision. There was a reason for it at the time. I'm not so sure about the sale piece, but, hey, that's slightly different. I think it was just a different time. But in those, I think it was just, they don't want this baby, let somebody buy it. Off you go.
I laughed before when you said about that your father kind of disappeared for a while because, and we will get onto this, that is a recurring theme in his life, is disappearing. So moving forwards a bit in your childhood to when you were 17, so your grandmother, my great grandmother, passed away and you pretty much became homeless. So how did that happen? And what did you start to think about yourself at that point? Because obviously you'd had the nearly being sold. Now you're kind of without a home, without any parents, like a father who disappears all the time. Where were you mentally at that stage? And do you think survival instincts were developed through that?
I guess survival instincts have been pretty much throughout. Because even as a younger, my grandmother had an illness. So she couldn't swallow and she was always quite poorly. So there were some limitations in what we could do. And my grandfather died when I was 11. I was very close to my grandfather. But when he died, things were very tough for her. There wasn't a lot of money around. It was very, very tight times. But by the time I got to 17 and when my grandmother had died, I was very fortunate that I had been chosen to take on a role in Glasgow as an assistant at 17 to this regional director in a financial services business, which is quite ironic as we kind of talk about maybe later on how that kind of came full circle. But there was no way I could get flown back. But this boss of mine stepped in to ensure that I could get back. And so I came back. So here's my grandmother has passed away. She was in a rented house. It was what we call a council house in Scotland, a state-owned property. So technically when she died, they'd said, you can't stay in this. And therefore I was technically getting told I have to leave and I have no home. At 17, you're a bit thick really at 17, you don't really know what's happening.
I wouldn't necessarily say thick. Maybe naive is a better word.
Well, maybe naive's a bit. It is more it. But, you just got to roll with the punches, basically, because what's the alternative? You do stupid things. But eventually I got a house and there was no money. And my father had disappeared. And the little bit of money that my grandmother had, she thought would go to me, which is also ironic because as we deal here in Spain with some of like later life planning and wills, etc., it is ironic that at that young age, I found out to my cost, basically, that, well, actually, I wasn't entitled to anything because technically she had died intestate, i.e. without a will. And the next of kin was my father, who was AWOL and no bugger could find him, as always. And in those days, you had to put an advert in the paper for 7 years to see whether they would turn up. And he did.
7 years is a very long time.
It's a very long time. So don't be hanging out for any of what would have been like a few £100s, it would be nothing.
And so how did you feel when he showed up again?
Well, when he showed up, the funny thing was this little bit of money that was there, he took, which was kind of like, okay, fair enough. It's only money. And it was not a lot. But I just thought at the time, it was hilarious, really, when you think, my God, you would have said, well, you just have it. But it was nothing. But no, he took it. It was when he would turn up, over the stages of the years, he would just kind of drop in. And then there would always be a drama. and he would disappear again, you know? So,
I mean, later in your kind of professional life as well, one of the things that from doing the research beforehand and kind of reading some of the things that you sent over, one of the things that really stood out to me is how you, in a corporate environment, you always wanted to do the right thing. You were holding people in power accountable. You were pushing back on things when they were doing things wrong. Do you think that stems from that period where other people were clearly doing wrong by you? And that kind of set your moral compass in a certain direction.
maybe I think I don't know that you would actually think about it at the time, but it becomes what is the right thing to do. I think in an accountability in the corporate world, there's so many Teflon coated people where nothing sticks to them, and they try and slip and slide like snakes, and snakes in suits. I think there's a book, isn't there, Snakes in Suits? And it's so appropriate. But I just think it's about doing the right thing. I'm not a saint, I'm not Saint Moira, but I do have, I'd like to think I have a very strong moral compass that says, do unto others.
Yeah. And so,
Like biblical term,
yeah. So going back to early years of work, still in Scotland, then, and I don't want to dwell on this because this isn't about kind of like trauma porn in any way, but that's when you met my father,
Yeah.
who is, well, sorry, was, what's a nice way of putting this? A piece of shit. Talk me through that part of your life in terms of the what happened and the effects that had on you and us as a family.
Well, when you're young and I guess, you see things and people differently. So he was quite good looking in my eyes at the time. And, I was still young, but, we kind of went out, hung out, and then I got pregnant. That was a change. It was a game changer. And I had a house, which was a council house that I had fought to get. In the time back in the 70s, I think it was late 70s, the Margaret Thatcher government opened the thing for people to be able to buy their property, their council house. And I did exactly that. So when I bought that house, he kind of came on the scene, as I say. I got pregnant, and it was very much an era of, it's you should be married. But we didn't get married at that point, and he was a little bit out and about. He was a type where, he wasn't accountable. Should put it that way.
Well, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. He was an alcoholic.
He was a shit. He was no doubt out womanizing, drinking, whatever. But I had got pregnant again, with yourself. And you were the second baby there. And the push was on to get married. And it was very much a thing. And I knew I didn't want to get married. I really didn't want, because, I realized then what I had, especially when I was in hospital after your birth. He was getting pissed, basically. He's getting drunk. He'd robbed the gas meter for the money from it to get out and have a celebration and wet the baby's head while I'm in the hospital. And so that, it said it all. But when you are pretty much emotionally blackmailed into, this is the thing to do. Children should have a father, and it's wrong that they're not, the parents are not married. And even though I didn't really want to get married, against that kind of backdrop this is wrong for two children. You kind of go, well, okay. But, as they say, a leopard doesn't change its spots, and he never did. And he just got worse.
You were saying about how some people get so hung up on the kind of like childhood family dynamic and everything. And like, I'm not at all. That is not something that I have defined my life by, because I know he was abusive. I know we ran away from him to basically save your life, save our lives. That was a very real part of my formative youth. But I'm not one of these people who is like, oh, I wish I had a dad in my life. I don't care. Like, I'm really happy with where I am. I think you did an incredible job of raising the pair of us, who are two very, very different kids, very different. But you did a great job of raising us on your own and having to start from scratch as well. And I think, without, again, kind of dwelling on the trauma porn, after we ran away from dad, we were living above a pub in the south of England. You were working behind the bar. To me, hearing all of the story around what happened to you after your grandmother died, this is a very similar situation again. You're starting from nothing. You're having to build from complete scratch and figure out what does the next step look like without really knowing what direction you're heading in. How did that feel, having two small kids and knowing that your survival instincts had to kick in, but not quite having the direction of where it was going to go.
Well, I think the survival stuff had to kick in before, because I had bought my council house. When he became extremely abusive, and I mean extremely abusive, in a time when the police would come and they don't want to know, because again, it was a different era and it would be domestic. So the police literally turn a blind eye. They really didn't want to know. And it's slightly different times. But in those days, it wasn't. So I decided that I would sell my council house and buy a hotel. I'm in my 20s with 2 babies, basically, and a dickhead of a husband. And that's exactly what I did. So coming back into about survival and kind of escaping, the first step of escape was actually thinking it would be a new opportunity, that it would be different.
And that's a very, it's a very human thing to process it through that lens. And in recovery, a lot of the time we talk about things being geographicals and the idea that, if I just go somewhere else that's away from my addiction, then my addiction won't exist anymore because I won't be surrounded by all the factors. But you can't move away from the problem because you're the problem. And, it never works.
It certainly didn't work. But I mean, at the end of the day, I had 2 children to think of, i.e., you and your sister. And so, therefore, it was worth a punt. So I'd sold my house, bought this hotel. Yes, it was all the wrong way round, but I fixed it and got it onto the right way and developed the hotel into a cabaret venue, which you may or may not recall, actually.
Oh,
But
I remember.
turned it all round and did everything. And, it a bit like life, even now, it wasn't my intention to sell it and up sticks and move with you and your sister. But there comes a point when enough is enough. And it wasn't a planned escape. So what had happened was, the abuse continued in a different type of way. So it was more emotional abuse and mental abuse and very intimidating and threatening. Now, bear in mind, I was doing all the work. In that hotel, I was the cleaner, the cook, the singer, you name it. I was the whole shebang.
Well, my memory of that time, and I have very limited memories from that time, but my memory specifically from that time wasn't in the hotel. Like I say, the limited number of memories I have from then was sitting next to Dad in a pub. That's all I've got. So it doesn't surprise me that you were the one doing all the work, because the only recollection I have of him from that period was being in a pub, giving me alcohol at the age of like 4.
Oh my Lord. And I didn't
Yeah.
even know. So there you go. But I was able to kind of immerse myself in that business, trying to make this new life. And it was 20 hours a day. Sometimes I'd sleep on the floor, so I wouldn't really properly sleep, because I had to get up and do breakfast and do everything. And I turned it into a venue where people had a great time and they'd book to come back before they left, so we had something excellent. However, the leopard doesn't change its spots. And I have a very, very clear recollection of being in the kitchen in that hotel with this guy with his face in front of my face, head to head, being verbally abusive, intimidating, and there was a carving knife right behind my back. And it's only a split second, and thank you, God or the universe, that stepped in, that I didn't pick up that carving knife. Because why? I don't know. How? I don't know. But I didn't. And thank God I didn't, or our journey would have been very different. The time had come, enough. And I got divorced. But the problem was, because we had a hotel, the judge said, you have to stay in it. So we're divorced under one roof. But, I used to move every night, and you might not know this, with a big bunch of keys, because the keys in those days, it was like a big jailer's key, which was probably quite appropriate, from room to room, because he would come banging and lock every room. And he didn't know which room I was in, to bang and bang on the door, screaming and shouting, I'm going to kill you, da, 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 da. Till one day I thought, screw this. And I had an opportunity through somebody who was a friend who used to put small fashion shows on in our hotel. And she knew somebody who needed a manager to run this in Sussex. And it was live-in. So I had a buyer for the hotel, because I had decided the hotel's good for sale. And so when the buyer was in the process, one day with a lady called Ellen, who was like a mother to us.
Rest in peace. Love Ellen.
Bless her. Ellen came and we laughed her head off. Those days we didn't have mobile phones. And so she was making some bacon in the kitchen and we were trying to find the moment to escape where he was distracted with something. And we made a beeline out the door. Our cases were already in my neighbour's car and they took us to the station. But thank God we had stopped somewhere else first. And this neighbour phoned back to her hotel, which was next to ours. And he was screaming and bawling I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her. Screaming in the street. But we eventually got on the train from Blackpool to go to London. And the one thing I'll always remember when you were little was when the train came into Preston Station, which was the next point that he could technically have joined the train, we locked ourselves in the toilet. And back in those days, the British Rail toilets were really tiny, a bit small. And there we were, Ellen and myself, both you and your sister, in that toilet. And we were in there for ages.
Oh,
but
God.
every time it was noise of going, shh. But we made it. We made it to London and we made it down. But it was a bit of a journey. We had no money. The sale got caught up in a chain. Maybe he screwed the sale over. I'll never know. But what the heck? That was then. This is now.
Well, and I think that's it. It's people so often focus on the stories that they create in their heads around that stuff, and other people might have fixated on he screwed this sale up and he did this and he did that without actually having any evidence of it. But the fact is, you can't change that. So you just have to deal with the reality of it fell through. You can't do anything about that. You have to keep moving forward. And I think, to your point just then about we had no money back then, that is probably the first time I remember where you really showed this ability to push through and always find a solution to the problem. As I think, that's one of the things that I consider myself very lucky to have, is this mindset that it doesn't matter if there is no money or if there seems to be no path forwards, because there is always a way forwards. I just need to find out what that way is. And that mindset of not allowing yourself to get stuck in a place, I think, is one of the biggest gifts that I've had from you. And so, we're south coast of England now. I want to jump ahead to kind of you being you've worked your way up into corporate and you're incredibly successful in finance. But at that time, you're the only woman around the board table. So how did that feel? Because that's a huge shift from where you were, and the dynamics, especially in a corporate boardroom, are incredibly different to being the hostess with the mostess. Like, so how did you A, get there, and B, how did you find that's it?
Oh, somebody said to me, somebody looking for managers in financial services. Would you be interested? Yep, count me in. It's commission only. You have to sell first. So yeah, the blah, blah, blah. You've got this, but actually you have to do the donkey work first. And within the first 6 or 7 months, I was in the top 10 of a very stable sales force because I was going for it. I had 2 mouths to feed, you and your sister. And quite frankly, nobody's giving me any money from anywhere. If it's to be, it's down to me. End of. So I progressed, and then I was interested in doing something more. So I was asked, about a training role. So I said, count me in, set me targets. I smashed the targets, and then the guy shifted the goalpost, and I thought, you're an ass, And they said, but you can still stay. No, I'm not staying. And I was offered a role of setting up a financial services recruitment business in London within 7 days. I was there. Straight in. So what happened then is within a month I had a car crash where I lost my speech. Couldn't walk. I thought I could talk, but I was but I was a bit of a cabbage, and they thought I was gonna die. And I remember we had a fight to get your father to take you and your sister for a week, and a friend stepped in to kind of, make sure you were both okay. But in the meantime, I'm on this journey of dying, basically, according to everybody else around me. But in my head, no, I'm not going anywhere. I also had a clear determination that I was going to speak. And they said, you got to stay in convalescence. I said, I can't do that. I've got 2 kids to feed. So tough. So I get out. So I get on the interview trail, could hardly string a blooming sentence together. But, in my head I could. But it was a little bit embarrassing. But this other company must have felt sorry for me. So they gave me a job. And I was kind of a senior training role in a company called Legal & General. So they were a big legal insurance company. And I went in there and I did everything the neurologist said don't do. I trained. So call me a rebel. I trained people in behavioral science, because there was already something I'd started to look into when I was selling. I was always about learnings, your own self-development, always about learning more, and still to this day in the same path. On that, behavioral science, then I was training people on technical stuff. I mean, really heavy duty technical stuff about the setup of pension schemes, about how to sell pensions, how to sell inheritance tax mitigation, which is bizarre that all these years on, we're doing exactly that now. This is what I was doing. And then one day, a headhunter called me and they wanted somebody to join this big financial services business who'd been fined by a regulator. So I was actually hired to go in and put corrective action in place to basically make sure the company complied and put the procedures in place and get the sales force forward facing. So I was bloody hated, as you can imagine, that hard-faced bitch in London, she's telling us what to do. But because I had sold, because I had trained, I was a bit unique, because normally you had people in these head office positions who'd never sold. So they couldn't relate to what the guys were doing. And of course, every angle that they've got as well. So that's where I stepped into this bigger corporate world and became sales director. So it was a big business and, a man's world. So coming to your question of being in the boardroom, I got away with murder, basically, because I could say what I like. And because I am, call a spade a spade. My CEO used to say, Moira, she's not a shrinking violet. She is not a shrinking violet. I think he was being polite. I'm not too sure. But the bottom line was, he'd say something. Everybody used to be trembling with, God, my God, John's calling us to the office upstairs, and everybody, oh my God, what's your problem? And I said, John, if you don't want the answer to the question, don't ask me the question, because I'm going to tell you as it is. And that was the difference. And I think that's where I held my own. I didn't need to be, something special in this. I just call it as it is. You don't like it? Don't ask, because I'll tell you how it is. And there'll be no window dressing.
Yeah. And from my experience, most people in those situations don't want to hear the truth. They do just want people to toe the line and tell them that they're great and that their ideas are amazing and that everything is brilliant. But actually, it's only when you confront the truth that you're able to really move everything forwards. And so at this time, so you had no problem with being disliked by people. And you spent so much of that time breaking the mold, I suppose, because again, it was of a time where women were generally in those positions and they definitely weren't speaking out like that. How do you think that stemmed from your experiences in childhood? Do you think that your drive and your need to kind of cut to the chase came from having lived with such instability for such a long time?
I think there could be an element of that. I think also you weren't answerable to anybody other than yourself, because there wasn't anybody else. So if you're going to make a mistake, you make a mistake, you fix it. If it's to be, it's down to you really to make it happen. So I think there's an element of kind of not being answerable to anybody because there wasn't anybody.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's about being, could say, was that inconsiderate because there was nobody to consider? But so in my youth, there was nobody there. So it was me. You rise or fall by what you do. You just get on with it.
And so what was the kind of impetus to becoming your own boss?
Well, I think, situations happen and, you either fall or you rise. You got one or two options. So when Hillsheimer were sold, the company were sold basically. And actually, ironically, they were sold to the company where the guy who was the jerk way back at the Ideal Home exhibition who'd approached me. And I thought, oh, no, this is not my bag. So by default, I ended up doing consultancy work in some interesting businesses in equity release. And then I was offered a number of roles. But at the time, my partner at the time was terminally ill. And so there was a couple of factors that were determining what way do I go. So I was doing consultancy work and I was offered very large positions as global head of, recruitment, basically in one of the big recruitment companies, the CEO. And then I was one to set up a big financial services for a big security company. So there's lots of things happening. But sometimes the universe is paving your path in a different way. And so whilst I was doing that, The guy that my partner basically, who had this serious heart condition and had had another heart attack. Basically, there was a little bit of a line in the sand there that said he was going to have 5 years to live. I phoned up a company and said, kind of like, gives a job, the guy, well, you come in. Well, the guy was a complete and utter jerk. The guy was turning over a lot, but the recruitment sector that he was in, he treated the people abysmally. He said to me one day, "Hey, Moira, how do you think it's going?" And I said, "You know what?" And I still remember he was 6 foot something tall, white hair. And I said, "God, it's like snakes and ladders. I think I went down the snake, and he went like a big beetroot. I said, "I'm off." But I had already made the decision to set up on my own because I thought, this jerk can do this. What am I doing? So
Yeah.
probably not the best thing to say to somebody who's got a serious heart condition. Don't worry, the mortgage will be paid. I'm going to set up my own, and that's exactly what I did. And I set up Business Solutions, so my recruitment outsourcing business, and pitched for my first with the Welsh government. I still have a copy of my first check, my first payment check from them to this day. And there's a story in that, and that person as to why I'm here today. So it's funny how things come full circle all the time. The world is going round and opportunities are there on that circle when you see them. So there was me. I set up this. I won some of the biggest recruitment projects in Europe.
There's so many highs and lows in your story. One of the things that I don't see clearly is like the motivation to start your own company. Most people, it's driven by kind of one of two things, which is either ambition or self-protection. You weren't really either of those things. Yours was very much just like, oh, well, this person's an idiot and they can make it work, so I suppose I can do that. And then you just get into the situation and then you apply yourself. Where does that level of motivation come from? Because I think a lot of people who are, especially who feel stuck in certain areas of their life, they can't see how to break out of that cycle. And to your point about, the opportunity is there when you see it, how did you find a way to be able to see that?
Well, I guess in the situation when the outsourcing business, when I set that up, I had no idea what shape it would take, none whatsoever. It was just luck and good fortune and stepping up to the plate, basically. The reality is, opportunity is there. And you need a bit of self-belief. You need a bit of balls, basically, to say, you know what? What's the worst thing that can happen? It doesn't work. So what? Are you worse off? So people overthink. They really overthink. But when the opportunity presents itself, well, you either take it or you do a U-turn and go and hide under a carpet somewhere. But, the bidding for one of the biggest projects in Europe, I didn't know it was the biggest project in Europe. I just did it. Put in all the assessment processes from top to bottom, got in the water. GM had bullshitted basically in terms of what was the scale of the project. It was about 3 times bigger than what it is, but the time scale was still the same. Did we do it? Of course we did it. Did I have a lot of bumps in the road? Jesus, did I have bumps in the road? So, these things happen. They test you. They're there to test you. So what do? Do you give in and panic? No. We went on to do all of the projects, all the supplier parts for GM. And I think those things carve you, It's just experience. But your choice in the overall thing is you roll over and play dead or you get up and you fight.
And you are definitely a fighter. And I think the other thing for me as well that's been kind of very apparent throughout your journey so far, including to where you are right now, is you're not afraid of trying new things and learning new areas of business or actually learning new things. And so, one of the things that you have done is kind of later in life, you have gone back into education. Like you are a certified hypnotherapist. You have done things at courses at Stanford. You're about to finish one with Harvard. What is the drive for continuing to learn, and what are you still trying to master?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know. It's just, again, as opportunity. Something bobs up and you go, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll have a go at that. I love a challenge. I like to win. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but I like to win. I don't like to lose.
And I think with that point, it's like nobody really likes to lose. But I think the big thing that sets you apart from a lot of people that I come across is, yes, you like to win, but losing doesn't define you. You are in my mind, my original example of failure is a learning exercise,
Absolutely.
nothing else. And I think that is one of the things with your mindset that I find really incredible is your ability to not be held back by failure. And I think it's a very modern mindset, but you've had it forever. Yeah. And I think as well, in terms of the failure piece of it, you've always had incredibly high standards for yourself, but also for the people around you. Where where did that come from?
So if we are offering a business, offering a service to clients, and that is our business, whatever that service may be, why are you going to give something that's shoddy? Why do you want to be like the trash? Be the best. If you're going to
Yeah.
do it, be the best.
I mean,
Why not?
I have two kind of memories from childhood around this. One, which was you saying, it doesn't matter what you want to do when you grow up, just be the best at it. And the other one was I remember once coming home from school and I was like, Mum, I got 95% in my maths exam. And you were like, oh, that's great. What about the other 5%? And I'm
So
pretty sure you didn't mean anything negative by it, but I definitely have unpacked it a lot with my therapist. But I also realized that, over that time, that instilled in me the idea that even 95% isn't enough. Like you have to push to be the best. And that yes, there are elements of the way I act in work, which stems from that. And this idea that, maybe I will never be enough. But it hasn't held me back. If anything, it's been a motivator to make me want to continue to learn. And I think with what you've been doing now with continued education, that also inspires me to do things that can allow me to evolve as well. Because I think so much of being the best at what you do also stems from being able to identify not the limitations, but when things have run their course and that it allows you then to evolve beyond that. And, it's exciting to evolve over time. I think if I just did the same thing day in, day out, I'd be bored senseless. And again, that probably comes from you having had 700 different lives. And seamlessly, that brings us on to where you are now. Because, whenever anybody asks me and they're like, oh, so what does your mum do? I was like, she works with death. And part of that is because it's it's a great punchline, but it's something we all have to acknowledge is a part of life. And so what brought you to Spain and working in the death industry?
I know, it's bizarre. Who could have ever thought? And I love it. I'll say that. But before I say it, let me just say, in terms of your 95%, because I do feel I have to get this out there. This is not about perfectionism. It's about growth. It's about learning. So it's not about, you failed. It's about learning. So when you speak to your therapist, say, I'm really sorry, but can I just clearly define what we mean about that?
I don't
Is
think that's how it works. I mean, I appreciate you trying to give a caveat on that. Like many things in life, we cannot dictate the impact. The impact is the thing that is defined by the person receiving. So, but it's not something that held me back. It's something that has shaped me. Again, to what we were saying earlier on about so many people have these like memories of childhood that they use to define them and limit them. And that's not been my experience.
yeah.
But I mean, where did that need for 100% come from? Because when you were doing the Stanford course and every week when you were submitting your things and you were like, oh, I got 100%, I was like, can't this bitch just get like 90% for once in her life and make it easier on me?
It was a course on addiction. I was unfortunately addicted to getting 100%. I'd have been so pissed off if I'd have got less. But thank God I did. And I was the oldest in the class of all the class around the world, but I smashed it. I don't like coming second. I don't know what that is probably your therapist will have a field day with me.
I'm just going to send in this episode.
But yeah, maybe it's, back from the days even when I was in school, because when I was in school, in Scotland, they call the top student of the school, the ducks. But I was the ducks of the school. So there was never, I could never be second best. I wasn't allowed to be second best. So I've kind of that was instilled in me and the learning. So, but this is life. It's just about growth. This is your growth mindset, isn't it? It's about growing, constantly growing, and I don't think that that's something that I hope will, that my brain keeps going enough. and that I can still learn because it's important, well, it's important to me. Everybody's different and I enjoy it. This one is okay. The Stanford one was great because it was stretching. It was technical, so I felt I had achieved in the summer last year when I did the real estate one, that was, I just had to get it basically, but I did. And I slammed it, and I think I beat the record on the time. I thought they were going to fail me because I didn't do enough hours. And then I did the wills and UK wills and trust course, and that was stretching, even though I'd done it a million years ago. But hey, it was good. Just constantly learning. But you asked me, how did I get here? You remember I said about one of my first checks. Well, the guy who wrote that check basically stayed a friend, and one of his directors of the business that I had helped put some sort of recruitment stuff in for when they were set. Well, I mentored him in his setup. One of his directors basically was coming to join a company in the UK in the death industry, shall we say. We're kind of touching on it. I use the term loosely in the death industry. I remember phoning you said, geez, Eric, I think I've just said I'll take a job. You went, what? I went, yeah, don't ask. And what is it? It's to do with funerals. What? My Lord, don't ask. But this guy was going to be CEO of this business, and he needed somebody to come and restructure Europe. And it was a bit of a healthy number they were going to pay on it because he said, oh, here's my strategy. I said, oh, cut the crap. Where's your pain? Don't give me this shit. Where's your pain? And he said, I need somebody to restructure Europe. So I came over here to Spain, which landed me in Alicante, joined this business on a 2-year contract. Oh, my Lord. I thought I'd step back in 1980s direct sales before compliance existed. It was a shit show, quite frankly. So anyway, I put a lot of fixes, doubled the sales, got people forward facing. There was a lot of stuff going on, but I did see that it was in a funeral related business, but it didn't have any empathy. They didn't give a shit. Quite
Did
frankly.
you feel at that point then, going back to something that resembled the early days of your career in terms of how they were operating, and then also adding in that additional layer of them having no empathy, did you feel like you were taking a big step back in your career, or did you start to regret your choice?
I didn't regret the choice because it was a journey that was different. But it was like stepping back. It was like going back the way and thinking, oh my God, this is dross. These people, I've never seen people quite, bear in mind from a blue chip environment to something that is completely like the guy in the recruitment thing. He had all that money, but he had no finesse. He didn't give a shit, basically. It was about money. This was about money. This was about punch, 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 get the sale regardless. I thought, wow, what is this? How some of these people had got to this position. They had no vision. They had no idea. They just followed the cut and paste kind of process that had been since it was started up. But things change. And as it was evolving, the person who brought me in left. And I was left with an numpty, basically, that I could see that had caused all the grief. He didn't want me there. And quite frankly, I didn't want to be there because there was a lot of stuff. And I thought, I'm not having this on my toes. So we came to the end of the duration, and I left. And I fell across this place, this office that was a shithole, basically. And I went, I can do something with that. And I set up this one-stop shop for expats. It was just where I was. I was in an expat land and there was a need. And I thought, do you know what? Because when I was in the funeral planning company, there was no way that I even considered setting up a funeral planning business. Although maybe a seed was planted because my neighbor said to me early days, why don't you do your own? I went, what? So maybe he planted the seed and it stayed there until the time was right to flourish. And then the time became right. But my God, how we have evolved since I've set that up. So I set up a one-stop shop for expats. I couldn't offer all the services myself because I didn't know what they were, but I could find people who could. And since then, the business has evolved. All the collaborations that we have become part of the business in-house, of which we offer the services ourselves. And now I have a unique, holistic approach to funeral planning and later life planning that, without sounding arrogant, nobody has in the world because people have bits of it, but we have it all under one roof.
And so how has working with grief changed who you are as a person? Because I can only assume when someone's loved one has passed away, that is one of the most difficult times of their life. And to your point about the other company, that there was no humanity about how they were dealing with people. How has supporting people through their grief process helped you evolve as a leader?
The empathy thing is something you have within you. You know, looking at another business or other players who are in there, it's a case of it's a bit of a rubber stamp to the death sector. Whereas I felt that that empathy piece, that really hands-on bit was missing. What we do, yes, we're a commercial business. We have to make money. We have to make money. That's how we grow. But it's not all about money, because there are times where somebody needs more help than somebody else. It's just the way it is. A woman, we have a very basic plan that has got no frills whatsoever. She's 90 odd. The caterer said, I'm going to take her to see him in the morgue. I said, don't do that. Let me get her. Let us deal with him and get him prepared, even though it's a basic unattended cremation. No frills, nothing. Let us do that. Let's take his clothes. Let us get him dressed and let's prepare him. And then we'll take her to see him, not in a morgue. And, they've been together for like 60 years, for God's sake, And so we did. There is something that is so rewarding inside, and seeing that woman basically say goodbye in a better environment to her husband rather than a hospital morgue. That is, I say to the people who work in my business, we're not working in a sweet shop, This is a different kind of business. If everybody has to reflect that kind of empathy, or they're not on my bus. And that's the way across the board with everything that we do. It is client first. Those are words that are used in companies all the time. Client first, client focused. A lot of the time, it's the biggest load of bullshit you've ever heard. It's
Oh,
window.
100%. One of my big frustrations is people who don't have a public persona that matches their actions. It sounds like, you very much you've done corporate, you've built your own businesses, but where you are now, part of your success is because money isn't the driver of success. So what is the driver of success for you now?
Oof, that's a very good question. So for me, success will be when we've got franchisees delivering, a business with a soul. And it is a business with a soul. And I love it because we do it better. I've seen so many funeral services where, yes, they're professional, but is the soul there? And dedicating to that person who's passed. Oh my God, and you've got to read the room. And I have done funerals where I've had them all singing.
I was thinking about you this morning. I was reading something about in China, they're having to put stricter rules in place about strippers at funerals.
Oh my lord.
And it made me laugh because I was thinking about the times you've told me about having people singing along. And I was like, is this the next stage?
Oh my Lord. Oh, let's not go there. I don't want that vision.
So with everything that you're doing now, it's a very different space from where you've spent the rest of your career. Are there any things that you had to unlearn in order to show up authentically in the death space?
No, I don't think so. No, not that I'm aware of. Because the things where we are now, if I look back, it's almost like this is what I've been training for. I kind of feel that my journey has been leading me to this. All of those things have been like the education room for where I am now.
Yeah.
But back in one of the instances where your grandfather, my father, who became an escapologist after the music industry because it came home.
Which I will just kind of add some clarification for my American listeners. An escapologist is an escape artist, and he was in the circus. And so Harry Houdini, that kind of thing. So now back to you.
Yeah, that's true. But at one stage, when he was in our lives, he taught me how to get out of a straitjacket. But, I kind of think back on that and think, you know what, being locked up and being strapped, you can get out of it. You just need to know how. The thing is, when you talk honestly and you're talking about these things, you don't realize how weird it is.
Yeah, most people couldn't write that, let alone have lived it.
Maybe that's why, nothing is a problem. Maybe against that backdrop, you kind of think, a father who would just some of those escapes were incredible, absolutely incredible. But business is business, and opportunity presents itself all the time, no matter whether it's in business or in personal life. You just have to have your eyes open and be able to see it and not be afraid to do it. As I say, what's the worst thing that can happen? Failure is about learning. Failure doesn't define you.
And so, so much of your journey has been about rebuilding and reinvention at different stages of your life. And not to out you in any way, but dear listeners, my mother here is just turned 70 years old and she moved to Spain 10 years ago. So started in the death industry at the age of 60. So what would you say to somebody who is looking to rebuild or reinvent their life at, say, 45 or 60? What advice would you give them?
Well, at any age, to be honest, Eric, it's never too late. If you have got a passion or a dream, follow it because, it's all in your hands. You can do what you want to do as long as you have got a belief in doing it. You are you. You're your unique self. If you have got something in you, bring it forward.
And so I have one last question for you, which is, knowing everything you know now, what is the one thing you would tell your younger self?
Well, I basically say is that, life is full of ups and downs. Jesus, I've had plenty. I've had them for everybody, I think. Life's is full of ups and downs. And only you can choose whether you stay down or whether you get back up. That would be my message. And always, JFDI. Just fucking do it. I said it in the board a million years ago. I still say it to this day. People go, what do you mean? I said, I think Nike stole it. They just left out the fucking.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I know it's late there in Spain. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of 12 Steps to Success. And thank you to my mum, Moira, for being exactly who she is on and off mic. This one feels slightly different for me because it's the final main conversation of the season. When I started this, I didn't really know what it would become. I just knew I wanted honest conversations about the messy middle, about identity, pressure, reinvention, and all of the bits that don't make the highlight reel. And over the course of this season, that's exactly what you've heard. Next week, there'll be one more episode, a compilation of moments from across the series, some reflections, a few themes that kept surfacing, and a small piece of news I've been sitting on for a while. If you enjoyed this conversation, I'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, or share it with someone who might need to hear it. It really does make a huge difference in helping the podcast reach more people. You can also find extra clips and additional content over on Instagram at 12 Steps to Success, with the word 12, not the number. And if you'd like to stay more connected, head to 12stepstosuccess.com. Again, the word, not the number, where you can sign up for the newsletter. No spam, just interesting ideas, reflections, and updates that align with the work that we're doing here, including the books and everything else that grows out of the podcast. But for now, thank you for listening, for sharing, for sending messages, for being a part of this. I'll see you in the final episode of the season.